Hey everybody, this is Betsy Carmody. We've covered a lot of popular culture on our little podcast, but sometimes there's a few things that just get past us. That's where the Sacred Six steps in. From Star Trek to Major League Baseball, from the streets of Baltimore on the wire to the trails of the Camino de Santiago in Spain, the Sacred Six is there to deep dive on topics that deserve just a little more attention. So if you're looking to cover an item in popular culture from A to Z, check out the Sacred Six on the Popping Collars feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Pop, pop.
Previously on Popping Collars.
Welcome back to Take Two. I'm your host, Greg Knight, and we're digging back in the Popping Collars archives to provide some updates on past conversations. I'm going to set you up. It was our 58th episode of the podcast. The date was March 23rd, 2017, and the subject was cults. Liz, Ricardo, and I welcomed a very special guest, David Frankfurter, a professor of religion at Boston University, onto the show to talk about alternative and sometimes dangerous belief systems. I think at the time we recorded this, the Leah Remini series, Scientology and the Aftermath, had just premiered, and we were looking to make sense of how new religious movements were being portrayed in popular culture. Nowadays, shows about cults seem to be as prevalent as ever, from things like Netflix documentaries to scripted series like The Idol on Max. Here we go. We're going to listen back to this old pod and through the power of editing, be able to insert updates and contextual sound clips. So jump in the Wayback Machine with me as we get a second take on episode 58 entitled, Now I'm a Believer.
Previously on Popping Collars.
Google this on YouTube right now, and you should watch just Top Gun Volleyball. Look it up.
I mean, but surely they knew what was. I mean, if they're slow-mowing and it's shirtless guys, surely they knew what they were doing.
Is it slow-mo or did I slow it down in my brain? It's slow-mo, right?
No,
I'm just checking.
Call it being slow-mo.
It's slow-mo, except Goose is the only one with his shirt still on. And everybody else.
And the song underneath is Running with the Boys.
Yeah,
Running with the Boys.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's homoerotic. I don't need to look at that.
And then I'll kick it to you, David, and we'll get started. Welcome to Popping Collars, the podcast that lives in the space between meaning and culture. My name is Greg Knight. I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministries at the Church of Bethesda by the Sea in Palm Beach, Florida. With me is Liz Easton. Hi, Liz. Tell everybody where you are and what you do.
I'm in beautiful Omaha, Nebraska, where spring has sprung today. And I'm the canon to the ordinary for the Diocese of Nebraska.
We also have Ricardo Avila. Ricardo, where are you? What are you up to?
Hi, Greg. Greg, I am the interim rector at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Long Beach, California.
And we have a very special guest with us this time, Professor David Frankfurter. David, tell us where you are and what it is that you work on.
Well, I'm a professor at Boston University in the religion department, but I live in New Hampshire, where spring has definitely not sprung at all.
No. It went the other way, I think.
Absolutely, we still have snow on the ground. So I specialize in early Christianity, but I've had a side interest in new religious movements from graduate school, basically, and I've published on the satanic ritual abuse panic, and I've been a media consultant on new religious movements too. So,
well, right away you can tell that we're learning a lot, because I think we continue to use the word cult throughout this conversation, and David consistently pulls us back to the term new religious movement. Who says we can't learn anything on this show? By the way, I know that we got the name of the Top Gun song wrong in the intro. It's playing with the boys. I stand by the volleyball scene from Top Gun being way better than the weird football scene from Top Gun Maverick. Thank you so much for being with us. This is our 58th episode, and our topic today is just that idea of new religious movements, especially in pop culture. So one of the conceits of our podcast is that people use popular media to make meaning out of the world around them. And there are no shortage of books, movies, television shows about what people call cults or fringe religious beliefs. And it seems, especially when it comes to groups that we don't understand, that we lean on that pop culture to fill in the gaps in our knowledge for good or ill. So we thought that it would be a great idea to get an expert on the topic to join us so that we can see where we may be misled a little bit. So David, I have a question for you to start. What is the difference between what people would identify as a cult versus any mainstream religious system like Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, etc.?
Well, I would say each one of those mainstream religions has certain intense forms in it. So, Episcopalianism is pretty mainstream, but you had Episcopal charismatics back in the 90s, and you have certain forms of Pentecostal groups. You have the Fred Phelps Church in the Midwest. You have all kinds of let's say, extreme forms of Christianity that cater mostly to youth or cater to people who believe the world is about to end. Now, I don't call those cults. I call those apocalyptic movements or youth movements or charismatic movements or something like that. But every religion has these. Buddhism has all kinds of new forms right now, and Judaism just, if you go to Israel, I mean, every person you'll meet is part of a different Hasidic group or drum playing group or something like that. It's wild.
So is the emphasis here on the word new, I guess? Like this idea that these belief systems just spawn off kind of new creations naturally, and it's the newness of these things that make them that make them different, that make them something else, I guess, for those who kind of follow the traditional path of these things.
I mean, I think the newness freaks a lot of people out, especially during the 70s and 80s. You had a lot of new forms of kind of quasi-Asian religions, Rajneesh group, Krishna consciousness again, Unification Church, and that just didn't fit with anyone's idea of what proper religion was. But the other thing that I think freaks people out and gets them labeling religious movements as cults is that they're much more intense than the kinds that you have in a nice mainstream Episcopal or Methodist church or a Reformed synagogue. They involve kids giving themselves completely over to the religious life, or not dropping out of college, separating from their families, all kinds of stuff which is actually very consistent with Scripture if you look at it, but it just doesn't work in a mainstream congregation, So, and with Judaism, it's been really interesting because people leave these kind of nice mainstream bourgeois reform or conservative congregations, and they hang out with a Hasidic group like Chabad, which you have at all the colleges, and very often, they find it just much more meaningful. You don't just go on Friday night and Saturday high holidays. It's like every part of the years is sanctified. Same thing with Christianity. So, I mean, that kind of intensity makes parents and mainstream pastors very uncomfortable, either because it brings into question what they're preaching, or it separates. The kids go off and join their own church and don't do what their parents were expecting of them.
Okay, so already you can start to see how the echoes of what David is talking about here is resonating in our current world, even outside of religion. Take the utter fanatic devotion that Trump supporters have, for instance. It frequently involves arguments with family, adherence to bizarre conspiracy theories, a separation from those who would question these things, and an embracing of a group that reinforces the mindset. For more on this, I would strongly recommend Andrew Marantz's book, Antisocial: Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation.
Yeah.
I'm curious, David, because I'm thinking about even times in my life, especially as a young adult, where that type of intensity of religion was really appealing and actually really formative for me, really important. But there seems to be, at least for me as an outsider kind of looking in, this difference between a new religious movement, as you describe some of them, like the Hare Krishnas, for example, or Pentecostal sects, and those expressions where a real tragedy occurs. So I'm thinking of Jonestown, or maybe famously
Heaven's Gate would be one.
Yeah, Heaven's Gate, or even like Charles Manson, which as far as I know didn't have a religious bent as we would understand it. But anyway, so a place where people give over so much of their autonomy to a charismatic leader or a set of beliefs or something like that, that their lives are really at stake.
I'm very interested in charismatic leadership as a phenomenon. I think it's one of the most interesting things we've ever had, we have in the history of religions. And I guess what I'd say is it's extraordinarily dangerous. And yet in every one of these religions, there is a way of understanding charismatic leadership. For example, in the Christian tradition, there is the concept of the prophet, of prophecy. And if prophecy is real, then a person can be a prophet. And it's very complicated to say, oh, that's just a false prophet. In Judaism, there are concepts of religious leaders and inspired teachers. One of the most interesting examples here actually is what's called Waco, the Branch Davidians. Because that was actually the people who joined David Koresh were a sect of a sect of a sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. You would not have joined David Koresh unless you were already inside the Seventh-day Adventist world and understood apocalyptic teachings the way he was talking about them. So here's a religious movement, a part of Christianity that already has an understanding of charismatic leadership. Jonestown, Jim Jones was kind of riffing off Pentecostal African-American preaching. And he also had this kind of Marxist approach too. So he was kind of adding something new in. So on the one hand, charismatic leadership is really interesting and important in religion. On the other hand, it's really dangerous. You're absolutely right.
That idea of charisma, even in our sort of established Episcopal world, can be dangerous on a very small scale. Like we see congregations where a very charismatic priest passes through for a season, and sometimes their charisma is hiding other things or brushing over other important things or not. And when they move on, the congregation sort of deflates in their absence. And so I'm always a little nervous when I meet those really charismatic clergy, even just in our context.
I feel like I'm on a different page than the rest of you, and I want to yank you all onto my page for a moment here. So I have three things to say. It takes me a while, but then so a little bit following up on what Liz, I think, said. David, I want to know where the line is. I want to know where the line is drawn. Like what makes, and we're trying not to use the word cult, but we're saying new religious movements. And without trying to put judgment into a word, like at what point is it like great that people get something out of going to these services and they'll give of their time and their money and their energy? And then at what point does it become coercive? Like, is Mormonism somewhere on that spectrum. David Koresh, you mentioned, was it only considered cultish because they were willing to die for this or were killed? So that I kind of want a line, like, where do Christian Scientists fall, or are they not even in the discussion? And does Scientology fit in at all? And are there forms of, we're talking about forms of Christianity, but at what point does it become, if there's a cult of personality rather than a cult of Jesus? Yeah. That's direct. What's the answer?
What's the answer?
You know what I'm asking, right?
Yeah, no, I know what you're asking. I mean, let's say we want our kids to be part of our own religion. We don't want them going off and joining some weird group. Okay, so maybe one boundary is that youth are to a large degree doing the same thing that the parents do. And I can say that, because it makes us all happy, but we all have been youth, and we know that, youth tend to really enjoy very intense forms of religion. And sometimes they join Bible study groups that get very intense. A boundary would be, if it's starting to prepare for the end of the world, that's probably a bad sign. I could say that, but on the other hand, you guys know the New Testament. I mean, the whole thing is like, it's oriented towards the end of the world.
Coming, yeah.
So it's coming. So it's like, I'm making this arbitrary separation of the Gospel of Mark and the Book of Revelation out, and Matthew and Luke in. But so I'm just saying that, I can make these boundaries, but I know that people on the other side of them have perfectly good arguments about why they're consistent and why they're pure.
I wonder, Ricardo, just thinking about your question, if there's something about the line being drawn at taboo, because I think that some of the things that define these new religious movements are some of the more extreme ones. So Liz mentioned Jonestown. So the taboo that's violated with Jonestown is mass suicide, right. Infanticide, stuff like that. Same thing with Heaven's Gate, mass suicide. When you're talking about things in pop culture, so like Big Love, for instance, HBO show that deals with a form of Mormonism that includes polygamy. That's a social taboo, right? I think that seems to be kind of this idea of taboo seems to be where the line is, I think, for a lot of people on what's on, and this is where it gets really dicey language, on what's on the side of normal and what's on the side of abnormal, you know? And I think that's kind of the code words that we're using with these religious systems, is what's a normal religion and what's abnormal religion.
It's an interesting question, and when that kind of thing starts happening, people feel really uncomfortable. The polygamous Mormons, since Mormonism began polygamous, it's part of the tradition, is to have multiple wives. The taboo is our taboo. It may not be a taboo as much in parts of Utah and Colorado.
Sure.
But the LDS makes a point of distancing itself from that history.
Yeah.
Right? Because they know that in order to be accepted, in order for those Mormon ads to run on television that I love so much, and I always put across those Mormon ads every chance I get, they know that they have to put that stuff at as far arm's length as possible, because that's going to identify them as something outside of the norm, outside of a Christian denomination. Oh, man, I had forgotten all about those I'm a Mormon ads. They were like the He Gets Us TV spots for the LDS Church.
I'm a singer, I'm a wife, I'm a new mother. Being in this industry, it's a balancing act between family and career. My daughter is growing in leaps and bounds, and I don't want to miss out on any of that. That is really important to me, and so home, that's where I'm going to be. I believe that being a mother is a blessing, and being able to be with my daughter is awesome. I love it. My name's Patrice, and I'm a Mormon.
It never fails to amaze me how much marketing for religious institutions is built around this structure of convincing people that you're normal. Like, it's okay that I believe in Jesus or whatever because I'm also a surfer too. I mean, that's a little weird.
A couple of weeks ago, I was in my clericals walking down the street here in Long Beach, and two young Mormon guys, they go out in pairs, etc. They were walking towards me, and I was rushing off to go somewhere, and they literally stopped me. So, excuse me, sir, I forget what the question is. Something like, have you encountered Jesus Christ in your life? I'm like in my clericals. And I said, yeah, I've heard of him, but I got to go to a meeting right now,
Since you guys are talking about popular culture, I want to recommend a documentary that was made in 1972 called Marjoe, Marjoe, and it's about a child minister, a Pentecostal minister, who grows up and does one last tour of the Southwest with a film crew. And he kind of shows all his secrets and talks about what he does. It won an Academy Award back in the 70s. It's a wonderful film that really gives you such a sense of what people want from these charismatic ministers and why they give money as well.
There's the experience where you say you're saved. Then there's the fire baptism when you get the Holy Ghost, and that's the tongues thing. And they love to work people over. You've got to shoot in on this. When you see people gathering around people and start laying hands on and praying with someone, you've got to come in with the camera too. It's very important because they'll be laying hands on someone and the poor person will be saying, thank you, Jesus. Now this is a person that's already saved, but they're getting the baptism, and someone will be standing there going, and the poor person will be standing there and they're not saying anything. Then after a while, about 4 or 5 more will gather around and they'll start doing the same thing. Come on, speak it out, until all of a sudden the person will, get so overwhelmed by the thing that they start going, and the next thing, that's it, you've got it, like they feel good, we got another one, Then they'll go on to the next person.
I said it in the introduction, but I really think it's true. Wherever we have gaps in knowledge, that's where movies and television and books come in, right? The example that I always use is I know what an asteroid field is because I saw The Empire Strikes Back. But the thing is, if I were in an asteroid field, actually the chances of me seeing an asteroid is pretty remote, because it turns out that space is pretty big. So what I think is an asteroid field is actually not, it's nothing like that, right? It's not all twirling mustaches and evil. It's people trying to figure out how to live their lives, right? And they just get caught up in a system that may work for them, but chances are it may not work for them. And how do they reevaluate their lives when it doesn't work? I think that those are the stories that are the most interesting to me. So when I see things like Scientology and the aftermath that Leah Remini is doing, where she's trying to piece her life back together, having devoted 20 years to this path, that's kind of the interesting piece. It's are new religious movements sustainable?
People ask me, I'm sure they ask you, that now that we're out of Scientology, do we still think like Scientologists? I think that I still think in Scientological terms, and it's hard for me to shake those things. And I think most people who are in cults find that. They don't actually know what they think. It's there's an immediate Scientological answer or a judgment or something, and then you're like, wait a minute, do I really think that? What do you think?
Yes, is my immediate answer, because I think that there are a lot of things that are ingrained in my way of viewing the world that I don't know I'm ever going to get rid of.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I believe that the thing that Scientology takes away from you is compassion, real compassion for others. And I have tried to cure myself of a lack of compassion. And I don't believe that I look at people these days with the same lack of compassion that I did when I was really inside the mindset of Scientology.
We tend to be so scared of charismatic leadership that we think that a person kind of lands in the group and then they get kind of sucked in, and the charismatic leader just kind of manipulates them. But usually what it is you come into a group and you like what other people are doing and you like their friendliness so much and you feel so at home that when a leader comes in and everyone seems kind of oriented towards him or her, you feel like, wow, this is the kind of the mother or father of the movement, but I like being among the people so much. So we should kind of think of charisma as more of something that's projected onto somebody rather than charisma as something that someone uses as a way of dominating other people.
Well, my question is more like, since you're here and you have a captive audience.
I've got two of those.
These are my favorite kind of episodes because we just pelt you with questions over and over again.
So I have always been a little bit fascinated by the satanic ritual abuse controversy that you mentioned earlier in your introduction. And as we were talking, I realized, and I guess it depends on sort of where you land on these things, but that was a case where the larger public imagined a cult.
Yeah.
So I don't know what, I mean, I guess I don't really have a question, but it's interesting to me that if there's a tension between like the fringe movement or the, whatever it is, the religious expression and the larger mainstream public, there's a natural tension that exists between them, and maybe they feed off of each other in some way. Yeah. In this case, the larger public was seeking an expression and they created it themselves. But there's a popular culture piece of that, I think, with like the Paradise Lost trilogies about the West Memphis 3 or about the McMartinville case. And anyway, I just wonder how that whole thing stacks up against the real religious movements that you're talking about.
Well, it was kind of this perfect example, you're right, of a cult that was completely invented. And so whereas, let's say you're a parent looking at the Unification Church and you're thinking charismatic leadership, sexual abuse or overly sexual, brainwashing, crazy ideas, those kinds of things going on. Here with the satanic thing, you had brainwashing, you had something going on in your own neighborhood, so it was kind of a secret conspiracy. You had sexual abuse, and this actually clicked into a whole trend in the, I guess I'd say the 80s and early 90s, when people were just beginning to realize how sexual abuse was rampant and in families. It wasn't something that was just like dirty old men in the streets or something like that. It was actually in families. The idea that there was like an organized religious context for this kind of thing just made so much sense in a culture like ours, where we've been imagining cults from the beginning of time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the beginning,
it was like a witch hunt.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, right. Witches are in cults, and one thing after another. We need like a sex cult for every generation, and this was the sex cult for the late 80s and early 90s.
It's like any conspiracy theory almost, that for whatever reason, it's easier for some people to imagine a very orchestrated, complicated set of circumstances aligning in just the right way for terrible evil to be committed. That's an easier thing to imagine than a member of your own family is sexually assaulting a member of your own family. Like, that is just too hard for people to grapple with. So they make this other, even more complicated thing that somehow seems more believable.
Right. And then, of course, to add on to this, you had these people in therapist offices who were saying, this happened to me. And there becomes a kind of secondary gain if you can provide the most lurid description of what your parents did to you. Everyone's going to listen. You're going to get on television. You're going to get police investigating you.
So there were no satanic cults.
No.
Is that what you were hearing? Really?
Well, listen. There's always been like a Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible, but they don't. The Satanic Bible doesn't have a whole lot to do with Satan, and the new group that is trying to put up like statues of Baphomet and children, that is like specifically designed to tweak the religious right. I don't think they have a whole lot more identity besides that. So really, there were no satanic cults. Exactly.
If you want to learn more about this satirical group that David is talking about, I would absolutely recommend the documentary Hail Satan, which really exposes how religion is more about superstitious belief than pure devotion to a way of life.
Great day to be a Satanist. I believe it, and I'm very excited about it. We're not what you think we are.
Satanic Temple was an idea between a handful of people directly confronting authority.
This makes life fun.
State officials have put up a 10 Commandments monument on government property.
Satanists are demanding equal rights.
I am a tax-paying member of Arkansas, and I don't want that there.
They just want to irritate.
The Satanic Temple says, and you also need to put up our monument to Satanism.
As a Satanist, I believe that confronting injustice is an expression of one's satanic faith.
You see Christian theocracy just creeping itself into our government, and it is our duty to stand up to this.
We want people to evaluate the United States being a Christian nation. It's not. We are supposed to be a nation that doesn't allow the government to dictate what is appropriate religious expression.
Satanists sue Missouri.
If we're being sued by the Satanic Temple, we got to be doing something right.
It's our goal to shut down their agenda, which is to bring death and destruction.
You guys are horrible people.
Is this how everyone that's different is treated?
It is out of not only Satanism, but patriotism that I am motivated.
Satanism is looking out for the other, because we are the other.
I am following a code of ethics, having fellowship with brethren. Why can't that be a religion?
We do indeed invoke Satan.
We have gone from 3 people to 50,000.
There's no doubt that this is my life's work.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
I remember even sort of recently in my life, I mean, within the last 10 years, a church in a diocese of which I am currently not serving, let me say this, was broken into in the middle of the night and a bunch of sacred objects were stolen. So vestments and, silver and stuff like that. And the message that came out, kind of alerting people about this, was they were probably stolen for black magic rituals. Instead of look on eBay. That cope is probably on eBay. Maybe not. I don't want to, you never know. And I don't know if they had some sort of information that whatever, but it seems wild to me that it can be the first place that people go.
Well, see, the gain for that is that if you have a subversive cult that is stealing it and using it in their rituals, it means it's really valuable. Right. And probably within the community, it's just a bunch of very expensive stuff that you need to do liturgy with. Mm-hmm. But if you have a satanic cult, which is actually investing it with all that value, then of course it's that much more valuable. Mm-hmm. It's that much more numinous and sacred. So there's that pattern actually goes back to the early modern period in the witch hunts, because the way that witch cults would use the host. They would steal the host and they would use it to fly and to do black magic, invested the host with so much extra power in a period when a lot of people were questioning what's the nature of the power of the Eucharist.
So in our conversation that we've had so far, I feel like we've been saying or just agreeing that as human beings, kind of sociologically or anthropologically, we have a need for belief, or we have a need for something in our lives that makes us think there's more out there. But so we talk about what are these youth of today going to do to fill in that gap when they're not believing in organized religion?
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm that convinced that, human beings maybe at this point need to believe in something. I'm actually more inclined to go with what you said, David, that actually what they need is a sense of belonging or a sense of connection or community that doesn't necessarily have to do with a faith community. That just happens to be how we've organized ourselves for 2,000 years do you think there is an innate need in us to have a faith in something, or can we just get by with, social media communities or groups or Dungeons and Dragony groups online? Am I making sense?
Forgive me if I get religious for a moment, but
podcast.
Exactly. But I think that the church speaks to that, and not just in sort of the accidents of our social lives, but in our real belief in the body of Christ. We have a belief in a universal church, which is the body of Christ that lasts forever. And I have a belief, or at least a direct experience in my life, of being completely changed and transformed by a relationship with Jesus, as much as a relationship with the people in my faith community. So I still have a lot of hope for the future church, as long as its leaders can be accepting and open to what God is giving us in this moment.
You really should be a member. We got a good thing going on. Stand over there and take a number. We're gonna see if you belong. What about those geeks you hang with? We really don't like their kind. You better get with the program. You don't want to get left behind. Good to be in the in crowd, but every in crowd needs a
So Liz, what do you have to offer us for the benefit of the group here?
So my staff pick this week is a book, which I read when I was on vacation, and it's a novel called A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And it came out about a year ago. It's just a brick of a book. It's like 800 pages, which sort of intimidated me at first, but I had this long travel ahead of me, and I was like, well, I'll get it started. And as it turns out, I couldn't put it down at all. I read the whole 800 pages in 1 week and was just wrecked by it. It was one of those great experiences of reading a book where the characters are so vivid that you feel like you know them. And I dreamed about the characters many nights that week, and have heard that others did the same. So it's this just really beautiful story about 4 young men starting out in New York City right after they graduate from college and kind of beginning their careers, and then being friends with one another for decades. And it's pretty dark. There's a very kind of a strain of the narrative, which is so dark that it's unbelievable.
That book sounds amazing. I've never even heard of it.
It's really, really beautiful. And one of the things that I read was that it was sort of the first try at an epic mainstream gay novel. And I don't know if the writer would agree with that at all, but it's an interesting lens through which to look at the book. But what really, to me, was most fascinating was this deep exploration of friendship and the fundamental importance of real friendships in our lives.
Oh, look at that. We had a mini episode of the PC Book Club breakout at the end of the show. That's fun. You can find Popping Collars on the web at poppingcollarspodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/poppingcollars, and you can find us on Twitter at poppingcollars. You can also find all of our archived episodes on our website, and our newest episodes are available wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Stitcher, iTunes, SoundCloud. All we ask is that you subscribe to the show, rate and review. That way folks will be able to find us. And we are featured on episcopalcafe.com each and every time. We love the folks at episcopalcafe.com. We know you will as well. Check them out for all your Episcopal news needs and beyond. And with that, that is Popping Collars for this time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you very much, David, for coming on.
Thank you, David.
The show.
Yeah, that was great, David. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely.
When are you going to write a book? When do we read your book?
I have a book. It's called Evil Incarnate, Rumors of Demonic Conspiracy and Satanic Abuse in History.
Wow. That's like Liz's perfect book.
Yeah, it is. It's like I've been waiting my whole life for that book, David.
It came out in 2006. I think you can get it in paperback.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.
We will see you next time.
Keep those collars popped.
Man, I love this episode. I wish the audio had come through clearer, especially there at the end. We were always fighting Skype or Google Hangouts back in the dark days before Zoom. This is exactly the kind of format that I think we always hoped that the show would have, but it's just a hell of a lot of work to book guests and coordinate schedules. I'll play the clip from the movie Bodies, Bodies, Bodies here.
I like your podcast, Alice.
What is your podcast about? Hanging out with your smartest and funniest friend. Did you just groan?
No.
When I said hanging out with your smartest and funniest friend. Like that! Like that! You did it again!
No, I didn't!
First of all, a podcast takes a lot of work, okay? You have to organize the guests, you have to do a Google Calendar, and then you build a following. It takes a long time, and I've been working on it for a while.
So we settled into our current format over time, but it's great to have experts that know what they're talking about on the pod every now and then. It's just incredible. Thanks for taking this trip down memory lane. Speaking of cults, I'll leave you with the advice that I always tell my confirmation class, which is never join a religious system because somebody tells you to or pressures you into doing so. If you're going to commit yourself to a belief, make sure it's something that you actually believe. And it's always a good idea to make sure that no one is getting hurt or being discriminated against along the way. With that said, keep those collars popped, and we will see you next time.
Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer.